Hello, everyone. Thanks for checking out this special episode of Really Dicey. This is Manny, and I'm here with.
Chris McDowall. I'm the writer of Into the Odd and Electric Bastionland and other things at Bastionland Press.
And Johan Nohr, who is part of Stockholm Cartel, and I did the graphic design and art for Into the Odd Remastered, amongst other things.
Mm. And today we're going to talk about Into the Odd. So I'm very interested in this book. I remember we actually did a Kickstarter preview about this book some time ago. And one of my partners in the discussion mentioned that he actually has the 2014 book that came out originally, and then this came out on Kickstarter. It did very well, and now it's coming out from Free League Publishing. So first, congratulations. So yeah, so anyone that's never heard about Into the Odd, how would you describe this book?
So Into the Odd is it's a game about being a treasure hunter and trying to go into dangerous places and trying not to die while you're trying to get the treasure, which sounds very like that could describe a lot of different games. But what I really wanted to do with this one is it's very, very rules light, but hopefully very flavor heavy. So it's got a very kind of weird industrial kind of horror feel to it, along with the very kind of simple, very fast-moving mechanics.
The setting, it's you mentioned it's industrial. I find it very fascinating because usually it's not your typical fantasy. It's not even your typical sci-fi either. It's somewhere almost like Cthulhu, almost in a weird way.
Yeah, I mean, part of the inspiration for that was when I originally started working on the game, I liked the idea of sort of mashing, of taking like something that you would traditionally think of as being a fantasy game like D&D. It kind of started with kind of trying to simulate a little bit of that early D&D experience of going into dungeons. But I wanted to draw more on those sci-fi and horror elements specifically, but without outright transplanting things into a like a futuristic setting or a completely modern setting. I still wanted that kind of weirdness that comes with fantasy. So the kind of the Industrial Revolution kind of is like the sort of implied era of the world, and I think that's a really interesting time because it's close enough to like the time that we live in that there's a lot of relatable things in there. Like you've got big cities where people are living in whatever housing they can afford and doing whatever jobs they need to do to stay alive. You're not talking about a medieval system where things are so different it's sort of almost unrelatable. But it's still far enough away to feel like you've got that little bit of separation, so it still feels a little bit exciting to be kind of looking back. So it's a nice kind of middle ground, I find, that kind of era.
For those that like my friend who purchased the original one years ago, what would you say are the differences between this and what's coming out now when it comes to content and art direction?
So the big thing that's different is it is a remaster rather than a kind of revision. That was the plan from the start. I thought I don't want to come in and change everything about the game because I wanted to make this for those people that liked the original game, but perhaps wanted a newer version of it. So Johan will be able to say much more about the art direction than me, but one of the big things was just making it look like the best possible version of what it is. And in terms of what changed in the rules, I tried to avoid changing anything. I tried to just add more content. So like that there's a dungeon area in the game, like a sample dungeon, and that's like tripled in size. And the wilderness area's got some extra bits to explore and some extra hooks. So I tried to just add more stuff that people would like rather than change the things that people already liked, if that makes sense.
I think like 2/3 of the book is like new content in terms of tables and adventures, and you have the expanded Odd Pendium as well in the back.
Yes, more like random tables at the back.
Yeah, so like there was that in the original, but not nearly as much as now. And I think for the art direction, it's a very different book from the first one. But I kind of wanted to keep the tone that Chris was talking about and the sort of setting, the implied setting, and sort of enhance that with the art and the graphic design. And so we talked about it. We wanted it to look like a book that might exist in the setting and in this sort of era. And I hope by just holding it and flipping it that you might, be able to transport yourself into that world. That's the aim, at least.
I wanted to ask you about the monsters as hazards. I thought that was a very interesting um, GM tool they can use in this book. Can you explain a little bit more what you mean by that? It's not just like a monster with stats. It sounds like it's something much more.
Yeah, I think for me, the kind of monsters that have always stuck with me in games have been the ones that you can't just fight in a straight up fight. Like if you can just push the fighter forwards and they hit the monster and the monster hits them back and the fighter will probably win. That's like the opposite of what I want. What I want is a monster that feels more like a puzzle. So again, to use like a D&D example, something like the Rust monster is a really good example, where it's you can't just approach it in the obvious way. You have to almost treat it like it's a puzzle to be solved. Like, how do we actually deal with this? But it's the key is finding things that can be dealt with in different ways, rather than just having like one solution to every type of monster. So the sample monsters that are in the game, I think at least kind of half of them are just like immune to being attacked with physical weapons in some sort of way. Like, that's not the way that you deal with these creatures. Yeah, that's always been what appealed to me more, rather than the sort of back and forth of just whacking each other until the numbers run out.
From an artistic perspective, was that difficult to create something? So, like the idea of monsters hazard, something not traditional. Was there someplace you had to go to be inspired by? Which, by the way, I love the art for this book. Not to go on a tangent, but if I didn't see your name on it, I would think these are two different works, which I love about. But compared from this to Morkborg, it's just very
That's very deliberate, and I think a few people were worried when they saw my name on the Kickstarter that it would become something of a Mörkborg crossover. But now I wanted to kind of prove that I can do more than just one thing, and I think the art here, because it's sort of like a collage thing, like collage art, a bunch of public domain, like museum, like historical images melded together, and it I don't know, I think it works because it's very like relatable, real images, but there's something weird with them, like something strange is happening to them. So that I don't know, it's like it's a style that I haven't seen that much of in role-playing game books, and so I wanted to experiment with that. And as for the monster, I mean, we don't really, I don't think we show that many monsters in the art. It's mostly like weird phenomenon and stuff that you can't really put a finger on in the art. And I think that's preferable to like these images of monsters where you can clearly see what's what. And like here, there's just something strange. You don't even know if it's a creature or if it's a just some sort of magical thing happening. Like, it's something odd that you see.
So you could be explorers in this game. Could you expand a little bit about like what exactly who or what you can be in this game?
Yeah, so the characters, what I wanted to do, I like the idea of characters that when you start the game, it's a fine balance, but I do like the risk of death, especially early in the game. So I wanted to allow for the possibility that your character might die if you do something wrong. And as kind of a side effect of that, I wanted character creation to be really quick, because as soon as your character dies, the most important thing at the whole table suddenly becomes getting that player back into the game one way or another. So I wanted you to be able to make a character really quickly in like a minute if you know what you're doing. So the character that you get is defined by your roll 3 ability scores, 3d6 down the line for strength, dexterity, and willpower, and you'll get d6 HP, and that's it. That's all the rolling that you do. But that on its own is not enough to kind of grip onto. And this isn't a game that has classes in the traditional way. So what you get is you get a starter package of usually like 3, sometimes 4 items. And with those, I really wanted to suggest what your character could have been before the game started, but I didn't want to outright say this is what you are or this is what you were. So you've just got a load of stuff. So I'm looking at the list now. So there's an example where you might have a harpoon gun, a baton, some acid, and you might be slightly magnetic. So if that is your character, it's enough that you can start to think, well, I've got a harpoon gun, so maybe I guess the character was like a sailor of some sort, but why am I slightly magnetic? And it's just enough to give you an idea, but I didn't want to pin people down and say, no, you used to be a pirate, because that can feel a little bit sort of restrictive. Whereas if you arrive at that conclusion yourself, I find you can feel more of a sense of ownership of that character. So yeah, it's very quick and hopefully give you just enough to get the flavor.
I think these starter packages are so great when you're playing it, because they're like these small toy boxes. You have these things that you're very encouraged to use them in play, because like a harpoon gun it's fun to use in problem solving as well. And like being slightly magnetic, that can be a problem or a solution to something. So I think those are really the invite to creative play, I think.
I also noticed there's rules here for, or at least mention about Arcana. Could you explain the magic in this world and how it can players access it?
Yeah, so the things that you're searching for are usually one of two things. As a kind of treasure hunter, you are obviously looking for treasure, which is something that is more valuable than it is useful. So something you're probably going to get back to the city, to Bastion, or to any part of civilization and sell to try and make money. But the other thing that you might find is something that's more useful than it is valuable, which would be an arcana, which are, in very blunt terms, they're kind of like magic items, but there's not really a sense of like magic in this world as much of just strange things that exist. So some people think they came from the stars, some people they came from the underground, but essentially they're strange items that usually do something very specific. So the one that I always remember is the bone magnet, which is a magnet that will attract anything with, oh no, it's changed. It used to be the bone magnet. It is now the skull magnet, for various reasons that I won't bore you with. But in this edition, one of the changes, it is now the skull magnet. So it will attract any skulls that are nearby, including those that are currently serving their purpose. And I wanted them to be, in the same way that we spoke about monsters, I wanted them to be like almost a puzzle to work out how to make them useful. So there's quite obvious ways to use a skull magnet, but you might also think of other kind of lateral ways to use them in kind of the problem solving as you explore a dungeon. So yeah, they tend to do weird things like that rather than be your typical kind of magical powers.
I want to talk a little bit about the themes of this work. I couldn't help feeling that it's like a message here about almost like the banality of modern living in a way, like our deep sense of wanting to get out and just find some magic that's left in this world. Am I correct about that? What were some of your inspirations? And then
I think you just described role-playing games, really. I think any role-playing game, anybody that is enthusiastic about role-playing games probably has a little bit of a guilty pleasure for escapism. But yeah, that I wanted to have that feeling of like I said before, if you've got a world that is all vastly different to the world that we live in, like if it's all knights and dragons and everyone's a wizard, things kind of stop feeling wondrous. But in this game, I did want to have that, like you said, that kind of mundane element almost. So things like factories and canals, and especially for someone who lives in a very industrial city in England, seeing those things around, it makes you think of the kind of the mundane world, and it makes the fantastical things feel more strange that you're seeing them. And yeah, it gives the idea that when you go out into the real world and you see a sort of a dark tunnel somewhere, and you think, oh, what could be in there? It definitely taps into that kind of feel.
I think also like people trying to make sense of a strange world, because they enter these strange places and they try to like describe them or understand them or map them. And I think that's a theme that a lot of role-playing games have, but I think here it's very much present as I mean, from my perspective, in like the art and the graphic design, it's something that I try to get across. Like the these are people who try to understand the weird place that they have come to, and maybe that's futile. Like you can't describe it or understand it because it's like beyond you, but they still try and they still venture into these dark places. So it's yeah, that's the what I think the fun and exciting parts about playing games as well, to like explore these locations.
Is it safe to say this is like a minimalism game? That's safe
Oh
to
yeah,
describe it.
100%.
I noticed some minimalism games tend to be when it comes to when they're printed, they tend to be smaller books, between 32 to 64 pages. Is that the same for this? Do you how what chapters are in there? How big is the book?
So the original version that you spoke about in 2014, that was, I think, like 48 pages or something like that.
Like that, yeah.
But because this one has so much extra stuff and all the extra artwork, it comes in 144 pages, I think. But what I wanted to do is what I've been trying to do with the last few books that I've done is I love a big heavy RPG book, like, and I love the excitement of looking through it and seeing all the stuff. But I struggle when there's so many rules in there. It's difficult for me to. It just sort of saps my enthusiasm away. So I like to try and make games that have the most stuff to rules ratio that you can get. So lots of stuff to get you excited, but the rules that you actually need to get started, like the actual essential stuff, is sort of like a couple of pages. So the rules here, I think, fit on, originally they fit on 2 pages of very dense text, but here I think we're on maybe like 4 to 6 pages spread out, but it's the same amount of rules. But yeah, the minimalism thing is definitely something I want to try and do with regard to rules. But I think you can have minimalist rules, but a kind of still have that flavor and a kind of a richness of the world. And it's not enough to just have minimalist rules. You have to, the space that is left by that has to be filled with exciting things, I think.
Is this a standalone work? You don't need other books. You just what is there a certain type of dice? Is it just D6 or more?
So it uses all the standard dice, so D4s through to D20s. And yeah, it's standalone. I wanted this to be a very self-contained thing. So it's got the rules, it's got everything you need for characters, advancement. It's got a pretty big dungeon in there now, like a three floor dungeon. It's got the wilderness area around the dungeon, which has smaller dungeons within it, and it has a little town at the end of the wilderness. So and then the odd pendium that we spoke about, that's just a collection of random tables, which is kind of there to fill the rest of the gaps that might come. So the main city in the setting, the only city that matters, is called Bastion, and it's not mapped out at all in the book, but the tables at the back kind of let you randomly generate your own bastion as you get there. So I wanted this to be something that someone could buy this book and they wouldn't have to think, because I'm the same as this. If I buy a book and I quite like it, the first thing I do is go looking for expansions and supplements, and I feel something in my brain will just keep poking until I buy an expansion, even if I've not played the game yet. But I wanted to save people from that, so there's no expansion for Into the Odd.
I think a lot of people can
it's
relate
a
to
self-contained thing. Yeah.
Do you know roughly like how long it would take to play the entire thing, the entire campaign, with like from the hex crawl to the dungeon to the smaller dungeons? Do you have any idea of that?
I've heard people have played it for, like, I think the longest I've heard is like 10 sessions. People have done like a little 10-session campaign, but I don't think that would necessarily cover everything, because it's not designed as something where you would necessarily see every little bit of it.
No.
I wanted people to get like their own experience as they go in. So the dungeon is like really non-linear. There's lots of weird shortcuts to the bottom and ways to go in different routes. So I wanted 2 groups to be able to play the game, and then you could bring them together and they had completely different experiences with that dungeon. So yeah, I think it could kind of last as long as you need it to, hopefully.
Well, being that this book has been out for some period of time, do you have any memorable characters that you made, or game situations that stand out to you?
With this one, I've run this dungeon so many times now, and like I say, it is interesting how many people take a different approach with it. Last time somebody asked me this, I told a story about when my partner, who hadn't played RPGs before, played this for the first time with me, and I'm not allowed to tell that story again because it made her sound like a horrible person for what she did in the RPG. She took a very ruthless survivalist approach to the dungeon. And you would not necessarily think that to speak to her. So I'll think of a different story. But I remember in the initial kind of play tests of this dungeon, I remember one of the items that you can get is essentially one of the arcana you can start the game with is essentially a portal gun. You can kind of create two portals that feed into each other, but you have to stay still and like focus on them, and then other people can pass through them. And we tried it, and it kind of broke the game in some ways, but we all had so much fun doing it, and it didn't break the game in a way that made it less fun. It allowed the characters to do some really interesting things and come up with some interesting plans together. And they kind of felt like they were cheating, but it was just on the right side of still feeling fun. It didn't feel like, oh, we've ruined this game. It felt like, well, we shouldn't be doing this, but in a fun way. So that playtest that I did, which was very early in the development, that kind of fueled the philosophy to those starting Arcana. I didn't want to save all the weird game-breaking things for later in the game. I wanted players to be able to get that stuff from like session one, because often session one is all you get. So I want people to be able to have that stuff straight away. So yeah, that was one that definitely stuck with me.
I think that those are the best like magic items or arcana, the ones that feel sort of overpowered or like badly balanced, because you feel like you have that's real influence and real power from the player side to the game. But still, there will still be things that you can't win with it. But yeah, those are the ones that I've had most fun with as well.
Yeah, it's as long as they still force the players to make choices. That's the thing. Because in the first edition, one thing that's changed from here is there was an item that I had in the first version of the game that was called a heat ray, which is sort of inspired by like War of the Worlds heat ray, Martian heat ray, and the way that it was written, it was kind of just a better version of a gun. Like there was no reason to not use it to shoot people, and the few times that came up, people were always a little bit deflated because they were just like, oh, it's just a really good gun. And that was that one's gone now. It's still in there, but it's been completely rewritten so that it's not really a weapon now. It's just you can use it to sort of slowly heat things at a distance, which can still be very powerful, but you have to come up with a plan to make it work. And I think that's what makes that's the good way to like break the game, rather than just giving them something that is outright useful all the time.
Final thoughts. Is there anything about this game that no one's asked you about that you wanted to share?
The one thing that I think often gets overlooked, and I kind of understand why, is in the adventure that's included in the game. Like I say, you've got the Iron Coral, which is this now quite big dungeon, and then when they leave the dungeon, they've got the Fallen Marsh, which is the kind of the wilderness area. It's like a little hex crawl, sort of going from the dungeon over towards a little town. And the little town at the end is called Hope's End. And I always feel like that gets overlooked because it's just like 3 pages of this little town. But I have got a soft spot for it because it's kind of based on the mood that I'm going for is if you go to like a seaside resort out of season, and it's just a very depressing grey place. I wanted to capture some of that, and I feel like that, like we spoke earlier about the kind of the mundanity combined with the weirdness, that's something that when I was trying to find like a flavor for this town quite early on, and then when I sort of found that was going to be the flavor, it really kind of unlocked something for me and made me realize that things that you discover in real life that look kind of mundane and boring, you can draw inspiration from them. You don't need to draw inspiration from some huge fantasy epics or like some distant culture that you don't actually know anything about. I've found it really useful to be able to just draw on the things that you might think aren't interesting and finding a way to try and make them interesting. So yeah, the little town Hope's End is something that I urge people to give a second look to.
Maybe that this was the first the first game that I did where this is extremely nerdy now, but I guess I'm in the right company for that, where the digital file of the book also includes the character sheet as an attached.
Lots of people have asked me about this, Johan.
Oh, really? Okay, so maybe it's not overlooked. You see that?
Yeah.
So you don't.
It's it's a
Like
groundbreaking technique.
Yeah, it's like embedded in the PDF. You have the character sheet PDF, so that you don't need to keep two separate files. So yeah, this is the kind of level that I'm on. But yeah, no, nothing else to add.
Thank you both for taking the time to talk to us about this great book. And to our viewers out there, I will put a link where you can find it or pre-order it. Oh, actually, I should ask this. Is it right now currently? Is it still in pre-order? Is it still being sent out to backers?
So backers have all got their copies now. You can pre-order it from Free League, and when you pre-order it, you might get it slightly early, but I think the actual official release date is October the 5th, I believe. So considering the date it is now, it's pretty much out. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Excellent. Yeah. All that will be in the description below. Again, thank you and be safe out there. We'll see you soon.